Alright, welcome to our Unit 2, Day 1 video. Today we'll be talking about conditional statements. So what I'd like for you to do is, in the topic right here, before you go any further, if you would write Unit 2, Day 1, conditional statements. And you might run out of room like I did. Okay, make sure you put your correct class number if it's P2 or G1 or G2. Go ahead and put that in so we can keep track of this, and then go ahead and put today's date if you would. All right, so we're going to be talking in Unit 2 about logic, and so a lot of what we're going to do is going to deal with writing certain sentences and trying to make sense of them and see if we can understand what the meanings are. And we do that a lot in geometry with different definitions and different ideas that we present. You have to be able to look at things logically. And so we're going to teach you how to do some of that. And so as we go through these notes, as I mentioned in class, there's going to be parts that we don't necessarily fill out on the videos. Some of those parts we'll go ahead and talk about in class. Excuse me. And some of those we will just not cover at all. So there's going to be parts that I tell you to skip, and so that's okay. Just kind of follow along with what we do here. So we're first going to talk about what a conditional statement is. You might have heard someone say that like a parent might give you permission to do something on one condition. They might say, I'll let you do that on one condition, and they tell you something you have to do or something you have to qualify with to be able to do what you want to do. Well, that's kind of the idea of what a conditional statement is. It's a statement that can be written in the form if, then. What that means is, well, don't worry about the symbolic part here. We can write a statement in the form if blank, then blank. And that means that if you meet that first part, where the word if is, then that second part comes true. Okay? And so this first part is called the hypothesis. Okay? The hypothesis of a conditional statement is the phrase immediately following the word if. So whatever comes right after the if is the hypothesis. And because of the way the English language works, we can actually change sentences around so it's not always at the very beginning of the sentence, but it will always follow the word if. And then, see, and there we go, there's an if-then statement after that. The conclusion of a conditional statement is the part that immediately follows the word then. All right, so there's several different ways we can write these, but you need to understand what the hypothesis is and what the conclusion is. Hypothesis of a conditional statement follows the word if, conclusion follows the word then. So let's take a look at some examples. We're going to identify hypothesis and conclusion of these examples. Number one, if you live in Nashville, then you live in Tennessee. The part that follows the word if is you live in Nashville. That's the hypothesis. So the hypothesis of our statement is the phrase you live in Nashville. Notice I don't write the word if with it. It's the part that comes after the word if. Then that makes the conclusion the part that says you live in Tennessee. So hypothesis, you live in Nashville. Conclusion, you live in Tennessee. That's your first conditional statement. All right, I want you guys to try and do 2 and 3. Labeling hypothesis and conclusion on your own. You'll need to pause the video here to give yourself time to do it, and then you can check your answers. Okay, this is what we should get. For number 2, the hypothesis is the sum of the measures of two angles is 90 degrees. I just abbreviated and wrote my symbols for that to save some space. The conclusion is they are complementary. Number 3, hypothesis is a quadrilateral is a square. Conclusion is it has 4 right angles. All right, so not only can we look at an if-then statement, or a conditional statement as we called it up here, we can take any statement and rewrite it in if-then form. Okay, so starting with number 4 here, we're going to change this sentence into an if-then statement. So here's what we have. An obtuse angle has a measure greater than 90 degrees. So we need to rewrite it in if-then form. Okay, so I'm going to say if an angle is obtuse, comma, then its measure is greater than 90 degrees. And I kind of ran out of room. That's okay. If an angle is obtuse, then its measure is greater than 90. Now, I could have flipped this around and said something equally true. I could have said, if an angle measure is greater than 90, then it is obtuse, and that would also work. So I want you to try 5 through 8 on your own, and we're going to check these answers once you get back to class. I'm not going to put them in the video. I want you to try and write these as if-then statements and see what different statements we can come up with when we talk together in class next week. All right? So let's go ahead and go to the next page. When we talk about conditional statements, we can talk about some related conditional statements, and that's taking these if-then statements and rearranging them in certain ways. Okay? And we have 3 related conditionals, that we want to talk about, and that's the inverse of a statement, the converse of a statement, and the contrapositive of a statement. I'm going to explain what all these mean. First, we have what's called an inverse statement. You take the inverse of a conditional statement, you form that by negating the hypothesis and conclusion. So you take the hypothesis and you take the opposite, and you take the conclusion and you take the opposite. So we go from saying something is to something is not, or from saying something does to something does not, or from saying something is equal to something is not equal. And that's what negating means. We're going to add the word not, or take the opposite meaning somehow. And I'll show you an example of that. Again, we can ignore the symbolic form. We're not going to go over that too much. Okay? When we take the converse of a conditional statement, we form that by exchanging the hypothesis and conclusion. We're going to change the order. We're going to put the hypothesis where the conclusion was and vice versa. We're going to switch that order. Okay? And then the contrapositive is formed by negating and exchanging the hypothesis and conclusion. So we're going to change the order and we're going to make the opposite meaning of both. So we're going to go through an example of how to do that. Alright, so we're going to write the inverse of the given statement, the converse of the given statement, and the contrapositive of the given statement, and we're going to assess the truth value. We're basically going to say, is this a true statement or a false statement? So first, let's work on writing the inverse of the given statement. So here is our given statement. If it is Saturday, then there is no school. This part about Saturday is the hypothesis, and this part, there is no school, is the conclusion, because it follows the word then. So the inverse is going to negate each of these. So we're going to say, if it is not Saturday, then there is school. Now here's how we have to do this. To negate the it is Saturday, we added the word not. But to negate the conclusion, there is already a negative term in there. There is no school. So we're going to take the opposite meaning. We're going to take out the no and say that there is school. So the inverse statement is, if it is not Saturday, then there is school. Then let's go to our converse statement. We're going to go back to the original. We always take these back to the original before we change anything. So for the converse, we exchange the hypothesis and conclusion. So the hypothesis, Saturday, will become the conclusion. And there is no school, that conclusion becomes the hypothesis. So it should look like this. If there is no school, then it is Saturday. Again, we switched the hypothesis and conclusion. We left the words if and then in their appropriate places, but we just took these parts and switched them out, exchanging them. And lastly, we want to talk about a contrapositive. Contrapositive, that's hard to say, is where you do both. You negate the hypothesis and conclusion, and you exchange them. So it's really like we're combining these two to get a contrapositive statement. Your contrapositive of this should look like this. If there is school, so we're taking that negation, then it is not Saturday. So it's like we take the converse of the inverse or the inverse of the converse. Either way, it's going to get you the same result. Now, I do want to talk about truth values. To assess a truth value, to figure out if the statement is true or false, you basically have to ask yourself this. Is there any statement that would prove the statement is false? To prove that the statement is false, we need a counterexample. Otherwise, we have to say it's true. So here's your first statement. We always want to go back to the original. If it is Saturday, then there is no school. That is a true statement. On Saturday, at least in Troy, we do not have school. hopefully you don't have to serve detention or anything. That's not what it means. So this is a true statement. Okay? So we want to look at the inverse next. If it is not Saturday, then there is school. So that's saying on a day that is not Saturday, you would have school. Well, I can think of a counterexample right away that would prove that false. This is a false conditional because I can think of a day that is not Saturday where there is no school. And that would be Sunday. Okay? We're not counting Sunday school. All right? So this is a false statement because we can think of a day that is not Saturday that proves this second part false. That's called a counterexample. A counterexample is any example that proves a statement false. Okay? So once again, let's move on to the converse statement. If there is no school, then it is a Saturday. Well, once again, this is a false statement for the same counterexample. I can think of a day where there is no school, Sunday, and that is not Saturday. What you will notice, if the inverse of a statement is false, the converse will also be false for the same counterexample almost always. But we do want to go to the contrapositive. It says if there is school, then it is not Saturday. So let's think about the days that there is school. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. None of those are Saturday. So we can't come up with a counterexample for this one. So that is a true statement. And you will also notice that the original conditional statement and the contrapositive will always have the same truth value. If the original is true, the contrapositive will be true. If a statement is false, we need to be able to give a counterexample. Okay? So what I would like for you to do is to take a look at numbers 2 and 3 here and try and at least come up with the inverse, converse, and contrapositive statements using your rules at the top of the page. And then we'll talk about truth value in class. If you want to go ahead and try and write out true or false for those, you can. If you are going to come up with a false truth value, you have to give a counterexample. But once again, we will look at these in class also. And that wraps up your video for Unit 2, Day 1 over conditional statements. Now, the next page you have in your notes is this. This is a page we will go over some of these in class. This page and the back of it we'll do a little bit, but I wanted you to be aware that you need to bring your notes to class also. We'll do a little bit of this, but you'll get most of the time in class to work on your assignment for Unit 2, Day 1.